One simple thing. What the happened to all the licensed video games? If you were alive between the mid-90s to 2010s, then you've definitely come across licensed video games. Now, for those unaware, licensed video games are what they sound like. It's taking an already existing brand and adapting it into a video game. And man, were these things just not everywhere back in the day. Between all the major releases you would find, you would also see a healthy dosage of these licensed titles. Not only were they just all over the place, but they became genuine system sellers. Like literally, some of these games outsold some of the major titles of that era. And in the current gaming scheme, these games are hot topics to talk about. Games like Battle for Bikini Bottom or the Lego Star Wars games, for example. All of them receiving massive success and generally positive reviews. No wonder companies would spew them out. It's a no-brainer, expanding their existing franchises to newer markets. But then, what exactly happened? I don't know.
So yeah, obviously I'm not as familiar as I should be, but hey, that's what we're here to do today. Let's take a look at these games, see what exactly was the case with licensed games.
Our licensed video game story begins with... I always knew my career was going to end eventually. Oh well, time to pack up. Goodbye, world. E.T., aka one of the worst video games of all time, as well as sole contributor of the crash of '83, was also responsible for bringing interest in licensed games. You see, the idea of adapting media into a video game was a novice concept, but a lot of companies found it interesting at the time. So there's no reason why when NES rolled around and popularity in video games returned, that this concept of adapting media into a video game resurfaced. You see, the NES was always marketed as an entertainment system, a toy almost. Hell, it was even in the shape of most VHS players back in the day. And so the games that came out were considered more toy products than games. Even though they're games. And of course, since the NES was already marketed as a sort of toy box, it made perfect sense to get tons of licensed brands and turn them into toys. And man oh man, were these everywhere. Seriously, all your favorite movies, all your favorite comic books from that era, now in 8-bit glory. And 99% of them were... I can't even believe how bad most NES licensed games turn out. Batman on NES. If you ever wanted to play a Batman game where for some reason Batman wears purple, oh yeah, and the game mostly takes place in the sewers. And like, do you meet any of the actual Batman villains from the sewers? No, very little of this game even looks like Batman, besides the Joker being the final game boss. Virtually nothing about this game was Batman. I wouldn't even be surprised if this product didn't even start out as a Batman game. And don't get me started on Back to the Future on NES. I mean, do they even watch the damn movie? Marty McFly, a character who already has a cool design, looks like this, and the game is about collecting clocks, and you go around Hill Valley, and literally none of the characters you interact with this entire game even remotely look like Back to the Future characters. Doc Brown isn't even really in the game. Literally nothing about this game is Back to the Future. I'm even shocked they got the title right of this game. Who made this? Oh, that explains everything.
In case you're unfamiliar with them for whatever reason, LGN was known for producing many licensed games on the NES, but they were infamous for being so bad. Literally, either they have glitches, or they would have graphical issues. On the case of Back to the Future, they barely even resembled the movie they were based off of. Yeah, LGN really put a bad name to licensed video games around this time.
Don't be fooled though, there were actually pretty good licensed games on 8-bit hardware. DuckTales seemed to be a pretty popular one. This one was actually developed by Capcom of all companies. In case you're wondering, they're the Mega Man guys, and it's not that hard to see the parallels between the two games. And yeah, as its own thing, DuckTales on NES was pretty well. In fact, it did so well that years on, it would actually get a remaster for modern day systems, and that was also apparently a good game. So yeah, 8-bit games had good licensed video games, but really it was Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis when the quality started rising. For the first time ever, basically, licensed games were finally considered good, not just possible or alright. And especially with those Disney licensed games. Seriously, The Lion King and Aladdin were considered critical darlings when they came out. And that was definitely due to their animation. The animation quality in this game were amazing, comparable enough to the movies to really impress a lot of people. But while I say these games did improve in quality, it's safe to say that they hadn't reached their peak yet. Yes, they had improved, but so did every other game around that period, and they definitely showed off a lot more than any other licensed game would ever. Yep, they all had their cult followings at some point, but they wouldn't be big like they would be just the next generation ahead. Yeah, once PS1 and Nintendo 64 release, these games were all over the place. Seriously, you couldn't look one store aisle without seeing some sort of licensed game. Disney, Nickelodeon, freaking Fox had all these games on store shelves. Now every single licensed product could be a video game. Burger King, cool spot, why not?
Well, at least I didn't have any licensed games.
Yeah, but you're the virtual boy. Who would want to make games for you?
Well, I'm proud of it. So proud that I put that on my Tinder bio.
Really? That just sounds fake.
Of course it's fake. It's the damn internet.
The late 90s and onwards was the start of major media companies producing massive marketing campaigns, usually to promote films. And part of that strategy was to make video games. Now, most of these games would either release before or right on the release of a film. And usually the plots would either be the entire movie, a condensed version of the movie, hell, some of them even did their own original take on a movie's plot. Whatever the case was, these games were here, and they must have turned out really popular, considering they were all over the place during the late 90s. How some of these games released years apart from the movies. The infamous one was definitely GoldenEye 007. But what made this game stand apart outside of releasing so many years after the film was the fact that GoldenEye 007 wasn't just a good license game. It was a good game. What I mean was that GoldenEye was revolutionary. It introduced 4-player multiplayer right out of the box. The interactivity between the world, the player, the enemies, the objects in the environment was something groundbreaking and not ever seen on a home console. Even graphically, it was similar to something you would see from a PC. Obviously not as good, but still for console standards, it was something interesting to look at. Rareware was responsible for this game. They're the same people behind Donkey Kong Country and Banjo-Kazooie, and they've always been about pushing a console's limits to the max. And it's no wonder the same philosophy applies to GoldenEye, hence why the game was such a technical marvel. Games like GoldenEye and other titles around that period showed that licensed games could be more than just garbage bin throwaway titles. They could actually be genre-defining games and revolutionize gaming as a whole. So by the time PS2, PS3, PS4, PS5 showed up, you'd think licensed games would naturally just improve upon themselves. You know, I would have thought the same thing too back then. Yeah, they kind of just stayed the same pretty much. PS2 came around and it was still getting licensed games, more or less the same quality as the PS1. PS3 showed up, now we're getting even less of them. By the time PS4 and PS5 showed up, how there barely any of these games? What happened?
It was you, wasn't it? It was you, wasn't it?
Yeah, something must have clearly happened. I mean, it's not like movies stopped being made, so what gives? As time progressed, video game development became more and more of a hard, tedious job. It wasn't as simple as just making a game. Teams needed to be larger than before, production value needed to be higher just to fit modern standards, and on top of that, with deadlines and all of these other things affecting game development, there was no ways licensed video games could be pumped out the way they were back in the 90s. And that's pretty much why we stopped seeing them. As soon as HD consoles became a thing, it was just too difficult to keep pumping out these games. On top of that, sales stopped being as big as they were beforehand. It's obvious people started catching on to the whole idea of a licensed video game, so people just stopped buying it. I mean, when your licensed movie game costs more money than just buying a ticket to watch the movie, you think to yourself, what's the point in even getting that game in the first place? And I think that's the major reason why we stopped seeing them. But needless to say, I don't think the quality of these games dropped. In fact, I think these games have a charm that's stronger than the 90s games. In fact, one of the most popular games from this era, Spider-Man 2, is considered one of the greatest superhero games of all time. And trust me, it's a janky game. It's not perfect by far. Graphically, it wasn't even as good as some other realistic looking games of its time. But you know what it had? A sense of charm. People absolutely love the web-slinging controls of this game, even more so than the modern day Spider-Man PS4 game. And the acting, while being cheesy, is still fun, and it's cool to see the actors from the movies actually playing their characters in the games. The game also takes a few liberties from the movie, of course, introducing more villains and side missions. Again, not a perfect game, but one that still emphasizes the joy of being Spider-Man. Definitely a fun game, and that sense of charm definitely shows in a lot of other licensed games around this time. Another fairly popular licensed video game was SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom. This game sort of had a cult following across the 2000s. Essentially, it's SpongeBob SquarePants mixed with Mario 64, a standard 3D platformer in the world of SpongeBob. But I was damn surprised how well they actually pulled off this formula. The game follows a simple structure. You collect golden spatulas to unlock levels, but everything from the level design to the character interactions, hell, even the graphics, managing to recreate the SpongeBob world perfectly in 3D. Along with that, the game just has, yet again, charm, and that charm sticks throughout the whole experience. Again, not a perfect title by any means, but definitely a solid platformer that kids of all ages can enjoy. The game actually became so popular across the internet that it eventually led to a remake, as well as a sequel to this game coming out this year. It's actually kind of surreal to see a licensed game like SpongeBob get such big treatment that it leads to not only a remake but a sequel. It just shows how much of a cultural impact licensed games truly have on gamers. Yes, I know they seem basic on the outside, but there's a lot of depth towards them. I mean, they've created a whole subgenre across the internet about people just talking about these type of games. Whether to hate them or love them doesn't really matter. It just shows how licensed games really are special titles. But here's the thing, what exactly makes a good licensed game? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. It's to respect the source material, take it and change it up in a few ways, make sure that the experience still works for fans of that source material, but also works as its own standalone gaming experience. I think by managing to merge these two worlds perfectly, you'll get a great licensed game. SpongeBob SquarePants and Spider-Man 2 definitely the best of this.
So as you can see, not all licensed games were bad, so I'm curious to see what the other generations had to... Hey, did you hear that?
Yep, it's finally time to talk about these motherfuckers. As I mentioned before, video games, specifically licensed video games, were becoming a lot more expensive to develop for. So rather than making a licensed game that's as realistic as the movies, Instead, game developers would Legofy the movie games. TT Games was responsible for doing this, making tons of your favorite movies such as Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and Harry Potter, and turning them into Lego versions of themselves. Now, I'm not trying to say by any means that these Lego games were cheap, but I do imagine that making a Lego version of Star Wars is way easier than making it realistic and having visuals comparable to something like GTA 5, for example. And I gotta admit, these Lego games were really fun. A lot of them do follow the same basic formula as each other, but I think that's kind of the appeal of these games. I think the combination of Lego, movies, and video games all into one big entertainment bundle was great, and it appealed to all demographics. And it seems as though this approach to licensed movie games has paid off. As recent as 2022, we're still seeing Lego games being released. Recently, the Lego Skywalker Saga released, and it's received positive reviews for finally reinventing the Lego formula slightly, making a game that's more modernized and fits the current gaming scheme. And I think it looks pretty good. It's definitely a lot different to classic Lego, but that is kind of the point. I'm glad to see that Lego is finally trying to improve itself after being essentially the same set of games for the past, 15 years? When it comes to Disney Infinity, on the other hand, that's a different story. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I got into the Disney Infinity thing pretty hard when it was brand new. Essentially, Disney Infinity was all about buying a toy of your favorite Disney, Pixar, Pirates of the Caribbean character, whatever, placing them on a pad, and that toy would transform into a game character. It was crazy fun, collecting these action figures, messing around in the toy box, mixing and mingling, having all these characters interact with each other. It was fun. Until you thought of the logistics. As I've said, you had to pay for toys separately to mix with them. When you get the game alone, you're only greeted with 3 toys, and that's not nearly enough if you want a full-fledged experience. So right off the box, you're expected to get way more characters just to have some semblance of fun. I'm not saying you can't play Disney Infinity with just the 3 basic toys. All of them allow you to play each of the 3 main campaigns, and each of them are fairly beefy, and you do get some mileage out of them, but you're not really seeing the whole Disney Infinity side of things. That only happens once you go out of your way to buy these toys. And as you may think, these toys did become expensive after a while. Again, I understood the appeal, but when you thought about it realistically, yeah, this approach to game design wasn't all great. And this thing lasted for 3 separate versions before finally deciding to pull the plug in late 2016. To be fair, Disney wasn't the original one to come up with this idea. Another completely separate series known as Skylanders actually was the one who invented this type of game. And Disney was actually the first to pull out of the system before even Skylanders, so they were thinking ahead of things even that early on. Hell, Lego even got into this thing with a game known as Lego Dimensions, so it's obvious this was selling well. But clearly by 2016 and early 2017, people lost interest in this, so they quickly stopped giving a damn, and no one started to buy these toys after a while. It was a fun concept, I won't lie, but after 3 toys you buy, you kind of don't care at that point, and you just might as well not even finish getting your collection. Yeah, these were fun while they lasted, but was it really that worth it?
Wait, don't tell me you're gonna end it all on a sad note.
Wait, All-Father Masahiro Sakurai?
That's right. You think you're just gonna end it there? You've missed out on so many good licensed video games. I mean, come on. Have you even mentioned Batman yet? I've seen the footage of this game multiple times, but you haven't talked about this game. The Batman Arkham series is
easily one of the best licensed series of all time. Come on! And don't forget Insomniac's Spider-Man, as equally good as the Arkham games, but for Marvel. And it's a fun as hell game. I mean, come on! You're right, those games are really fun. Hell, so many other ones are also really good. You're absolutely right. Licensed games are not perfect, far from it. But you know what they have? Heart and soul, 99% of the time. Licensed games are just something special, meant for kids, but usually everyone of all ages can enjoy them. While I'm not gonna say they're the greatest of gaming and even something you necessarily need to check out, I don't care. There's something truly special of licensed games, and I've seen that today. So, with all of that said, this was the magic of licensed video games.